Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into something that's really shaking things up on the global stage. We're talking about the recent U.S. decision to, well, hit the brakes on sending certain types of weapons to Ukraine. And we've gathered quite a stack of sources to help us unpack this. Lots of detailed reports from places like the Financial Times, AP News, Reuters, you name it. They all offer different angles on this. Our mission today is simple: really get into the weeds, figure out what specific weapons are being held back, why this is happening now, and maybe most importantly, what does this actually mean for Ukraine, obviously, but also for the wider geopolitical picture. Because this feels like more than just another headline, right? It seems like a noticeable shift with real immediate consequences. So let's get into it. All right, so let's break this down first. When we say halting shipments, what are we actually talking about? Which weapons are on pause?
Right. And what's really striking here is the type of weapons involved. We're not talking minor stuff. These are pretty high-value, advanced systems that Ukraine really depends on. Think Patriot missile interceptors, PAF-3s, which are just vital for their air defense against serious threats.
Absolutely critical, yeah.
Exactly. And then you've got Stinger MAM-PADs, those shoulder-fired missiles for taking down lower-flying aircraft, drones, AIM air-to-air missiles too, and Hellfire missiles, the air-to-ground ones.
Okay, so air defense and key strike capabilities.
Precisely. Plus, 155-millimeter precision-guided artillery shells, super important for accuracy, and GMLRS rockets for the HIMARS systems. Those guided multiple launch rockets that give them that long-range precision punch.
Right, the HIMARS have been so key.
They have. And even AT-4 anti-tank launchers are included in this pause. And an interesting point on the timing, apparently, this pause actually kicked off back in early June.
Early June.
Yeah, but it's only really become public knowledge just this week.
Okay, so this isn't brand new, just newly confirmed. Wow. That's a pretty extensive list of crucial gear. Which leads to the obvious question, why? Why now? What's the thinking behind stopping these vital supplies at this point?
Well, the main reason being put forward, and this seems to stem from a big Pentagon inventory review, is that U.S. stockpiles of these specific munitions are running critically low.
Critically low.
Yeah. So the argument or the framing from the White House is that this is essentially an America first kind of adjustment. The idea is to preserve U.S. national readiness, keep enough in reserve given other global tensions. They specifically mentioned China and other potential hotspots.
So it's less about Ukraine specifically and more about overall U.S. capacity.
That seems to be the official rationale. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is the one credited with initiating the suspension after this review flagged the low stock levels.
It definitely signals a shift in immediate priorities. Okay. Prioritizing national readiness. I can see the logic from their perspective. But for Ukraine, wow, the timing feels particularly tough. What does this actually mean for them on the ground?
Yeah, it's undoubtedly a major blow. Ukraine is, heavily reliant on these exact systems for its defense, especially now with Russia really ramping up its drone and missile attacks.
You mentioned ramping up. Are there numbers on that?
There are, and they're quite sobering. One source noted that in June alone, Russia launched something like, let me check. Yeah, a record 5,438 drones.
5,000 in 1 month.
Just in June. So that really underscores the level of threat they're facing daily. And Ukrainian officials are already sounding the alarm, say this interruption could seriously weaken their defenses. They're worried, understandably, about increased civilian casualties as a result.
Of course. Fewer interceptors, fewer ways to shoot things down.
Exactly. And analysts are pointing out, too, that this pause is going to constrain Ukraine's ability to conduct those deeper strikes into Russian-occupied territory. Those strikes have been a really important part of their strategy to disrupt Russian logistics and command.
So it impacts both defense and offense. This really does feel like a significant change from what we saw previously under the Biden administration. What's the broader context here? Is this part of a bigger strategic shift?
It certainly looks that way. You compare it to the policy under President Biden, over $66 billion in military aid sent since 2022. This is a definite, notable change in direction. And you can see how it aligns, perhaps, with some of the rhetoric from the Trump administration pushing for Ukraine to seek ceasefire talks. It feels like a pivot towards, let's say, diplomatic pressure rather than purely military enablement.
The diplomatic pivot.
Yeah.
But does that risk sending the wrong signal?
Well, that's exactly what critics are arguing. They're saying this kind of move could inadvertently embolden Russia. They might see it as, a sign that Western resolve is weakening. And it's not just external critics. There's concern within Congress, too. We've seen reports of Senate Democrats, like Jeanne Shaheen, for example, voicing serious worries. They're concerned this weakens Ukraine's negotiating position if talks were to happen, and just their overall ability to resist right now. So it's definitely not a move with universal backing.
Right. So internal debate, external criticism,
Mm,
lots of angles here. So looking ahead then, what should we and you, the listener, be keeping an eye on? What are the key things to watch as this unfolds?
good question. There are probably a few key area watch points, as you called them earlier. First, that ongoing Pentagon review is critical. What does it ultimately conclude? Will they find ways to sustain support, or are more cuts or longer pauses likely if stockpiles don't recover?
Okay, the review itself. Got it.
Second, the potential for alternative support. Will other countries try to step up and fill the gap? It's possible, but we need to be realistic. Global supplies of these advanced systems are limited, and delivery times can be really slow. It's not an easy fix.
Right, not a quick replacement.
Not at all. Third, watch Ukraine's own strategy. How do they adapt? Reduced air defense is a huge risk. Will they be forced to ration munitions even more tightly? What tough choices will that force on the battlefield?
Difficult decisions, no doubt.
And finally, the broader geopolitical signal this sends. It clearly reinforces that America First theme. And it emphasizes a preference, right now at least, for pushing diplomatic solutions, maybe even over immediate military backing. The world is definitely watching how the U.S. balances these priorities.
Okay, so let's try to distill this down then. What's the core takeaway for you listening? Essentially, the U.S. has put a temporary stop on sending some really key weapons to Ukraine. Patriots, Stingers, Hellfires, GMLRS rockets, precision artillery, the stated reason, are critically low U.S. stockpiles and a need to focus on national readiness, the immediate impact. It likely leaves Ukraine more vulnerable, especially with Russian drone and missile attacks surging. And it signals a U.S. shift, perhaps, towards pushing harder for peace talks.
Yeah, that sums it up well. It leaves us with a really profound question to think about, doesn't it? Beyond the immediate battlefield impact, how might this shift in U.S. policy fundamentally reshape alliances? How might it redefine what global security even means in the years ahead?
That is definitely something to chew on. A big question indeed. Thank you for joining us today as we dove into these sources. Keep asking questions, keep connecting those dots yourselves, and we'll be back soon with another Deep Dive.